Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming along to what is the last session of this year's Responsible Tourism Programme at World Travel Market. I'm going to hand over in a moment to Simon, who's going to moderate this session for you. I just wanted to point out that the session is being video recorded, which means if you do ask a question, you'll be starring on TV for the rest of the year. World Travel Market will be putting the video of this session up on their website and will be encouraging universities, schools and so on around the world to use it as part of their educational programs. It's going to put a quite big push on that over the coming year. So today is both for you, but it's also for people who will watch the video, I'm sure, over the coming months. I just want to introduce Dr. Simon Woodward to you from Leeds Metropolitan University. He's the moderator for this session. It's one in a series, I think now we've probably done about 5, Simon, over the years on cultural heritage. This year we wanted to focus very much on the economic contribution which tourism makes to the maintenance of cultural heritage, both in terms of the communities who live in and around cultural heritage sites and cultural heritage places, but also to the sites themselves. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Simon to take you through the next hour. Thank you very much for coming.
Yes, good morning, everybody, or well, good afternoon now. As Harold said, we've run several of these sessions over the last few years, exploring a whole range of issues around culture, heritage, and responsible tourism. And the message that we keep getting back in the feedback is that people want to learn a wee bit more about the realities of managing sites, about how you can, in this very, these hard-pressed times, raise funds to conserve quite often the built heritage, the cultural heritage that forms such an important part of many destinations. But at the same time, how we can also generate funds from tourists, from host communities, from the travel industry generally, to help sustain operations. And the third thing that always comes on feedback forms is we want to know a little bit more about intangible heritage. It's fine thinking about great castles, cathedrals, archaeological sites, but what about the intangible heritage, those aspects of cultures that are very, very important to so many of the host communities in the destinations that we work in? And how can we make sure that those are celebrated and shared with visitors? So I'm really pleased we've got an amazing panel of speakers today representing a whole range of those dimensions. First presentation is going to be by Dr. Jonathan Foyle, who, as well as being Chief Executive Officer of the World Monument Fund in Britain, also regularly writes for the Financial Times. So hopefully, he's going to bring a really interesting perspective on this issue, particularly on our major monuments and heritage sites, what it means for tourism and what tourism can do for them. So, Jonathan, if I can pass to you. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. A few quick words, if I may, about World Monuments Fund, because not many people have heard of us, at least fewer than they should have, because we've been going for 50 years next year and have worked in 600 sites in 100 countries to try and improve the lot of historic buildings that face significant risk. My question today, on that basis, devil's advocate of preservation for you. When is tourism beneficial? When is it harmful? And how can we navigate an appropriate balance? Well, the first principle is tourism is always a force for good when it's properly managed. It's growing in importance economically, and the economic contribution from tourism is obvious to the naked eye. Whenever you go somewhere, you can see a certain economic effect, but in myriad ways, so that the data is not widely recognized, it's not disseminated, analyzed, or understood particularly well. A recent 2013 study by the Heritage Lottery Fund in the UK estimates that heritage-based tourism is worth more than £26 billion to the UK economy, an increase of over £5 billion from 3 years ago. It's quite a blunt figure, though, isn't it? How do you break all that down? A 2011 American Express-supported study of the economic value of historic Route 66 in the US. I'm sure people will be horrified to think of it as historic. Some people. conducted by Rutgers and the National Park Service and ourselves, World Monuments Fund, estimated the number to be $132 million annually in direct economic activity, increasing to 262 with multiplier effects. That's where it starts to get, we need to get more focus. So it's political good news on the face of it, and it's a story that affects us all, because in the last few decades, especially with the breakdown of communism, more people travel from around the world than ever before. And openness and accessibility are the mantra of pro-democratic societies. Globalized commerce is its bedfellow, and the globalized commerce of accessibility is the tourist industry. But here is a nascent problem with tourism. As Anna Summers-Cox, the editor of the Art newspaper, says, we have to accept that the days of unlimited access to many famous cultural sites will very soon be over. The United Nations World Tourism Organization predicts that global tourism, currently standing at 1 billion people, will reach 1.6 billion by 2020, with Europe as the most popular destination. Now, the World Monuments Watch, every 2 years, has existed since 1996, and it's a way that we gather independent nominations for sites at risk around the world. So what people tell us is a really useful gauge. It's a barometer to the problems facing sites. And tourism features quite significantly. A case study from the recently launched 2014 watch was Venice, one of the world's most popular tourist destinations. It's a miraculous work of gradually evolving craft. Of course, brick from the lagoon's clays, glass from Murano, at least since 1297. But in the last century, we've moved away from that craft tradition, and we now construct with globalized, industrially produced materials. We are at the end of the period of innocence, which is the production of craft. And this global world is a very new thing to historic sites. The age of mass tourism has enabled people to enjoy Venice, and it's also inflicted a huge toll on its singular and finite resources. Its accessibility has allowed the purchase of second or third or fourth homes by the super wealthy to push prices out of the reach of local people. In the last decade, the native population of Venice has halved to around 50,000. Meanwhile, 80,000 tourists arrive per day. Squeezing through the narrow alleys with blind corners to find something to snack on, they may experience Carl Pilkington's feeling of being stuck in a game of Pac-Man. They could, in the best scenario, be enlightened by its beauty and history. In February 2009, the City of Venice launched the Venice Connected program to establish some principles for sustainable tourism. And what are the challenges, then, to its sustainability? Well, Venice, as we know, is on the front line of climate change. Rising sea levels flood the piazze more regularly, especially as the unplanned industrial extraction of water from aquifers caused subsidence in the 1960s. That stopped, but only after the damage was done, and a barrier is now being built with successive delays. But in the same 4 years since that forum was put together, cruise ships have arrived. And we're not talking any old ships, giant ships, right in the heart of the city along the Giudecca. They bring, undoubtedly, their argument is that tourism, the money that they bring, is inherently beneficial. 20,000 people a day arrive from the cruise ships into Venice. Where is their accommodation? It's on the ship. Where do they have their meals? It's on the ship. What's their spending money? What kind of shops are going to appeal to that spending money? You tend to find people using the time between meals, between nights spent on the ship, by a few hours in the town, and that creates a mass demand for a certain type of product, i.e. snacks and souvenirs. Nothing essentially wrong with that. However, the city has to deal with the fallout, and that means waste of all sorts and a new kind of trade which is often run by multinationals to run the shops rather than local people. Increasingly, people from Venice are working in the mainland because that's where the jobs are. This is now a service industry, often of imported staff. The damage by the cruise liners to the older trunks that are driven into the clay to form the foundation of the city is as yet unquantified. We will only be able to see the damage once it's done, unless we stop or mitigate or manage the cruise industry now. But it's not just Venice and it's not just Europe that's the area of concern. The issue is worldwide. The astonishing interrelated 12th century temple complexes of Angkor Wat and Ta Som and Phnom Batheng in Vietnam have been the subject of international attention since their rediscovery in the 1980s. Images of the temples emerging from the jungle have caught the imagination of many millions. The thing is, now that many hundreds of thousands of people are arriving, hotels are springing up. Those hotels draw on the local water table. The water table has sunk, the monuments are subsiding. Unplanned response to tourism. Tourists look for the best vantage point to take photographs and climb to the summit of the monuments. The sandstone is wearing down and is breaking from that activity. The issue of preservation is too often lost to the clamour of economic and tourism statistics. Here's an article in the Chinese Global Times of August this year. Some 158,900 Chinese visited the World Heritage Angkor Wat Temple in Siem Reap province in the first 7 months of 2013, up 69% compared with the same period last year, figures from Siem Reap Provincial Tourism Department showed Friday. According to the figures, China was the second largest source of foreign tourists to the site during the January-July period. South Korea was the first largest arrival group with 223,200 visitors, up 4% next year. The figures show in the first 7 months of the year, a total of 1.24 million foreigners visited the temple, up 6% year on year. Quote, "We see a steadily sharp increase in Chinese tourists to the temple and believe the upward trend will continue thanks to Cambodia-China close ties." Now, this may sound harsh, but it's clear that the unplanned usage of any finite resource can often destroy the asset it relies on. Growth is not limitless. How can the tourism trade sustain itself by preserving the special quality of the sites it trades on? It is the tourism industry which has the most to win and the most to lose and needs to drive efforts to support and sustain heritage, which is why World Monuments Fund is about to launch the Watch Preservation Partners Programme, which seeks corporate sponsors from the travel tourism industry to join with us in properly planning and managing tourism so that it is a sustainable thing economically and so that we leave a legacy of precious historic environments to our grandchildren. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. And I think that final point about the travel industry needing to be involved from the outset in managing a lot of the challenges that are created by tourism at these historic sites is one I think we'll probably come back to time and time again. Early on, you mentioned, Jonathan, that tourism can be a force for good at these sites as long as it's managed well. And I'm going to take that as my opportunity for one small plug, a new initiative we've got going at Leeds Met, online learning for tourism and travel professionals. A whole lot of leaflets like this, we'll leave them down at the front at the end. If you want to develop skills in a whole range of areas that you don't have already, come and see us afterwards. Okay, that's the commercials aside. Next speaker, Oliver Maurice, is director of the International National Trusts Organisation and is going to give a slightly different perspective on issues facing heritage destinations, I think in the UK and also a couple of interesting overseas destinations. Before taking up this current role, Oliver was regional director for the National Trust in Northumbria, which is my part of the UK. And again, travel advertorial, if you have never been to County Durham and Northumberland, you should go. But Oliver.
Well, good morning, good afternoon even, ladies and gentlemen. I think it would be worth just putting my role into context so that you can understand a little bit more about what the International National Trust Organisation is all about. It's a terrible title, I'm afraid, but we call it INTO for short. It was founded in 2007, and effectively it's an umbrella body for national and heritage trusts around the world. We are a body of advocacy. We advocate the need for the protection of both the cultural and natural heritage, tangible and intangible, and we try to help countries that are wishing to establish a heritage organization or a national trust to do so. I could go on in great depth about the organization, but we have 65 members around the world representing about 50 countries. And we are effectively a voluntary organisation. We only have one paid member of staff. I am a volunteer director, and there are two other voluntary directors as well. And our money comes entirely from our membership fee, and if I tell you that our turnover is a mere £50,000 a year, you'll understand that we operate on a shoestring. Now then, for all the properties that the trusts around the world are managing and that are open to the public, be it the built or the natural heritage, the income from visitors, from tourists, if you like, is critical. We talk about sustainable tourism, but in the context of national trusts around the world, the properties themselves would be completely unsustainable without the income from visitors. And I propose to give you three rather different examples of the benefits of tourism to the conservation of the heritage. And we're not just talking about cultural heritage in these cases, we're talking about the natural heritage as well. And if I may start with the National Trust for England, Wales and Northern Ireland, which is the largest and, if I may put it this way, mother of all trusts. 350 historic buildings, 700 miles of coastline, 250,000 hectares of countryside, 19.2 million visitors last year, and 4 million members. The total property operating costs of 228 million, plus conservation projects of 52 million, and acquisitions costing 7 million, represents a total of, the figure there, 287 million. Against that, there is the direct property income, which includes trading, which is the shops and restaurants, which produce 61 million, rents from farms, cottages, and houses of 38 million, the admissions from the members, the admissions from non-members who pay at the gate, 20 million, and that approximates to 295 million. And then on top of that, we do receive grants from organizations like English Heritage and the Lottery of 30 million, and the income from the 4 million members meets the balance, and that produces something like 140 million pounds a year. So it's a huge organization. In the year 2000, when I was still with the trust, they set up to do what they called a valuing our environment study in 4 regions. They were the Wales, northwest region, where I was at the time, the northeast region, which is the Northumbria, and the southwest. And the study showed in the southwest that 78% of all holiday trips to the southwest are motivated by the conserved landscape. Analysis of the results of the survey showed that the conserved landscapes in the southwest attracted a spend of £2,354 million from holiday trips and supported 97,200 jobs, or 43% of all tourist-related jobs in the region. And those findings are general for the 4 studies: that the National Trust is a mainstay in the rural economy, that the sites are a primary motivation for tourism expenditure in the wider rural economy, and that the NT generates between 5 and 9 full-time equivalents for each job where it employs staff in those regions, and it influences, through commitment to high-quality conservation of environment, 137,000 full-time equivalents, which approximates to 154,000 jobs. I believe these figures prove explicitly that tourism is of huge benefit to the conservation of sites, but is also of enormous benefit to the local communities, both in providing employment and the spend by the Trust on services and supplies. On top of that, of course, the Trust visitors themselves will be spending money elsewhere on transport, retail, and catering. I just want to briefly touch on the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, which many of you will have visited. And just to say that a year ago, they opened a new visitor centre, and in a year, 782,000 visitors from 173 countries visited that visitor centre and the Giant's Causeway. And connecting with the local communities in that area has been a key to the success. The director for Northern Ireland was quoted as saying at the first birthday party, she was very proud of the economic benefit to the surrounding community and Northern Ireland as a whole, employing 181 people through a range of services. Visitors gain an insight not only in the legends and myths of the past, but also discover stories of people living around the causeway today. And it's also a chance for them to connect with and learn more about the local community for whom the coast provides an important livelihood. Well, that is all splendid, and the National Trust, as I say, is a huge organization. I'm now going to move to a rather different property, which is in Addis Ababa. It's run by an organization called Addis Wubet, which was set up by no less a person, in fact, than the granddaughter of the late Emperor Haile Selassie, Princess Mariam Asfawassen. This house, strangely enough, is called the Muhammad Ali House, not after the boxer, but after an Indian salt trader who built it in 1920. And it's in the old quarter of Addis Ababa, and it's one of a number of historic properties. This particular one has been given to Addis Wubet to do a restoration job on it. And when completed, it will include a shop, a cafe, a library, a community centre, and will be open to the public, and it will also provide a base for their office. But the interesting thing here is that, although it's not yet open to the public, that they are planning to sell from their shop exclusively consumable and non-consumable produce from what are called the home gardens, which are the small holdings around Addis Ababa. And if you fly into Addis Ababa, you see a whole network of these small holdings, and it is in itself a magnificent cultural landscape. And so by buying the produce from the home gardens, they will actually be supporting the livelihood of those farm tenants and ensuring that the landscape remains as it is today. The profit that they will then mark up the produce, and they will sell it on to the customers, to the visitors, and the profit from the sale will go towards maintaining the property. And the idea is that having done this one, they will then become that will be an exemplar, and they will take on other historic buildings before they are destroyed, and which is one of the sad things in the developing world. Well, not just the developing world, but sadly a lot of the cultural heritage disappears in the interests of development, and that is something which INTO as an organization is fighting. But in the case of Addis Ababa, that is incidentally Princess Mary on the right-hand side, with the person who is organizing the shop. And my third example is actually not an INTO member, although these two slides were produced by an INTO member, the Malta National Trust, Dinlat Helwa. But this is a property owned by Malta Heritage, which is actually the government organization. And it's the Hypogeum, which you can see there. This property is amazing. It's an underground temple, and it was discovered by accident in 1902 when a builder working on a house, he went through the floor and discovered this amazing temple with 7,000 I think 7,000 bodies or skeletons within it. But it is a very, very sensitive site. And as you saw from the previous slide, the government there is foregoing substantial income from tourism in order to protect the property because it's so highly sensitive, protected in the sense of visitors not destroying the very thing they're coming to see. So they have 60 visitors a day only, paying 30 euros, which might seem a little bit exclusive. It obviously is exclusive as well. But in fact, I mean, if they opened it up to the maximum number of visitors, they could earn obviously a great deal more money. But in the interest of the conservation, it is very important that it isn't overdone. And going back to what Jonathan was saying about the cruise ships in Venice, it's a similar problem in a way. You have to be able to control access in order to conserve the properties. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
One of the things that suddenly struck me was, as we mentioned at the beginning, this is the 5th year we've run one of these sessions. This is the first time we haven't had a representative of a government agency or a municipality, local authority. We've heard two very interesting presentations from advocacy groups, and we've heard some big numbers being thrown around, 26 billion worth of heritage tourism to the UK economy, 124 million pounds generated by visitors to sites run by the National Trust. Those are, huge numbers. I think what will be interesting now, and the next presentation is from Vanessa Wood, who's the Business Development Manager at Durham Cathedral. And if you're seeing a little bit of bias with the Northumberland Northeast links here, yes. And Vanessa's going to talk to us about some of the practicalities of extracting money from visitors. Am I being too crude when I say that? At the individual site level. But, literally what, tourists and tourist income can mean for a particular site that is not set up as a tourist attraction. First and foremost, like many of our other sites, this is a place of worship. So really looking forward to what Vanessa has to say.
Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here and to represent Durham Cathedral and the north of England. And as Jonathan said, maybe there is a little bit of bias today, but if you haven't been to the northeast of England, you are missing something. It is a real treasure trove. Not only does it have a wealth of beautiful buildings, but it has spectacular coastline and beautiful countryside. And from London, it's only 2 hours, 57 minutes on the train, so it's a quick journey. So that's my little bit of a push. So what about Durham Cathedral? There has been a place, it is where the Shrine of St Cuthbert is. The cathedral that stands there now was constructed in 1093 and took approximately 40 years to build. It is a real statement of religious power and also political domination of the Northern Marches. It is a spectacular building. It's also the resting place of Venerable Bede. We do have a monopoly on the Northern Saints. You won't find them coming sort of much south of Durham, but it is a fantastic place. We probably were the faith destination when it was we had the Shrine of St Cuthbert, and we were only pipped at the post by Thomas à Becket when he was martyred. So unfortunately, we moved to number 2 at that point. There has been a cathedral and a community there for 900 years, so there has always been that interaction with the community and an economic contribution to the community, because obviously a monastic establishment needed supplies, it was a place of hospitality as well. So there's always been that two-way process. We have been described in a BBC poll as the best loved place in England. It is a very, very striking building. And when they talk about passionate places, passionate people, that really does sum up the Northeast and what we can offer. So, some practical facts. We are part of a World Heritage Site. We share that with Durham University and the Castle Keep. We are, as I said, the Shrine of St Cuthbert. We have been situated in the community for over 900 years. We have a tremendous amount to offer to both the tourist visitor, but also to those who are coming on pilgrimage. And I think that is one of the really important things which Simon highlighted, is that we are not a museum. We are a tourist destination, and we're very proud of that, but we are a place of worship. We are a living, working church. So we have two responsibilities to the community in that sense, and that is to provide a sacred place, but also to be open and welcoming and offer hospitality to the many tourists, about 600,000 a year, who come to visit us. The chapter of the cathedral are very conscious that they do not want to charge entry. So we don't charge entry. We rely very heavily on donations from visitors when they come to see us. The chapter have worked with the staff of the cathedral to produce a 5-year strategy which we have based on our 6 pillars, which are situated in the nave of the cathedral. And as you can see, with the 6 headings there are some very important factors for us. As I said, we are a working church, so worship and spirituality is a very important component of what we do. The Benedictine tradition, the monastic tradition, was all about hospitality, so the welcome and care aspect is also very important to us. We have also been a seat of great learning, of great academic study. We have the most fantastic collection of medieval manuscripts and early 16th century printed manuscripts. A large number of people come to study those. We have a collections room where you can come and actually request to see a manuscript and spend time looking at it. We have a very active outreach and engagement program on very many different levels. Many primary schools from the northeast of England come and visit the cathedral. But not only that, not only do we bring them into the cathedral and show them the wonders of this beautiful building, both historically, architecturally, and spiritually, we go out into the schools and do education programs of the schools. Buildings, treasure, and environment. Durham Cathedral, it stands there up on the banks above the River Wear. It is a fantastic building. We also have the most incredible collection of treasures, which at this moment in time, we're not actually able to display because we don't have the correct environmental conditions. I'm going to touch on that in a moment. But these are things we wish to share. And finance and stewardship, obviously very, very important. As I've said, we don't charge entry. And we're in that position where our outgoings exceed our income. So we are very reliant on the commercial arm of the cathedral to look at creative income generation in a responsible fashion, but which also respects the values of the cathedral and, as I said, recognizes that it's a place of mission and ministry and it's a working church. So we work in partnership in many ways, but we work very closely with the World Heritage Site, with Durham University and Durham County Council to promote the cathedral and the city of Durham. I think one of the most interesting and successful examples of what we've done recently has been the Lindisfarne Gospels, where for 3 months the Lindisfarne Gospels managed to escape from the British Library back to the northeast of England, back to St Cuthbert, in whose honour they were written. They were displayed in Palace Green Library, and we had certainly in the region of 100,000 visitors in 3 months to come and see the Gospels. Not only was that good in terms of showing the Gospels, but also the Dean and Chapter of Durham loaned some 12 exhibits to support that exhibition in terms of manuscripts, in terms of Cuthbert's pectoral cross, the portable altar, his ring. So we were able to bring together that whole history which binds the Gospel tradition together. And it's the link between Lindisfarne, where Cuthbert was. It's also about Bede being in Jarrow, and that whole sort of Northern Saint story, which is so important and so core to the history and the cultural background of the Northeast. The other exciting event, which is happening next week, and which we have been busily preparing for, is the 3rd Lumiere in Durham. This is a fantastic display of illuminations around the city and in the cathedral as well. In 4 days, we will be welcoming some 160,000 visitors. So this really is where responsible tourism comes into play as well, because we have to be able to control those numbers and do it in a way which respects the people of Durham, the people who live there, allows people to enjoy the fantastic illuminations that are available to see, but also brings in revenue and helps to support the city and the cathedral. There will be a spectacular sauna lumiere on the north face of the cathedral. There are installations inside the cathedral, in the college at the back of the cathedral, and then all around the peninsula and the riverbanks of of Durham. So if you get the chance to come up and see it, it is fabulous. The only thing I will say to you, and this is again because we're very conscious of how we manage things, between 4:30 and 7:30 there are controlled numbers, and it's ticket only. It's not paid ticket, but it's ticket only. After 7:30 to 11 o'clock, it's freedom of movement in the city, because medieval cities weren't really designed for 160,000 people all in one go. But thinking further forward, we have launched and have started our Open Treasure campaign. We realised to conserve this fantastic building for future generations, we have actively got to look at ways of generating money, but we have to do it, as we say, responsibly. What we want to do is to share our treasures. This is about offering what we have to share with the community of the North East, but also in the UK and further afield. It is about preserving our collections and a beautiful building. We are absolutely adamant we want to remain entry-free, and we want to do this very largely for the benefit of the North East. Phase 1 was the redevelopment of our Undercroft area to rehouse the shop, and we relocated our vestries, a £1.4 million development. It's very brave in these difficult financial times, but it is spectacular. It has transformed the Undercroft space, and I think we have created what I would call a visitor hub. We have the restaurant, we have the shop, we have a lovely foyer area, toilets through the door, which, you know, all part of the circle. So it is great. And if you come and visit us, you will see our Lego model cathedral, which is part of our fundraising. Pound a brick, you help build Durham Cathedral. 300,000 bricks. We're up to 38,000 bricks now, and it's really exciting. We've done the nave, we've started the Galilee Chapel, we've got involvement from local schools. They're getting really enthused about it, and even the Chorister School sends their weekly reporting team to photograph the progress of that. So we're engaging with the community. We're making them excited and enthusiastic about what we're doing, and so that they're part of it as well. The next phase is about how do we open up our collections? How do we think about showing all of the things that we have? So this development of the Monks' Dormitory, which is a fantastic space, marvellous beam ceiling, which will do an interpretation of the monastic tradition of the cathedral. We are creating a special collections gallery where we can show our treasures, but not only that, because we have these fantastic treasures, we're already loaning them out across the world. We are sending a copy of the Magna Carta, we have 3, which is going to Canada for 2015. We have just recently brought back a number of manuscripts which have been on exhibition in Paderborn. The Sanctuary Knocker was in the Royal Academy exhibition, the Bronze exhibition earlier this year. So we will also have the facility to have visiting exhibitions coming to the cathedral. We're going to redevelop the porches, so it's just going to be a much more open aspect, and that people can see the layout of the cathedral and how it links into the cloisters. The nave west end, which is the welcoming area of the cathedral, we're going to look at how do we enhance the visitor experience? How do we make it more accessible? How do we draw more people in? And then, as I said, we will have a really exciting exhibitions program, and we will continue to develop the learning and outreach. It's not just the cathedral, though. We also have, we own a very considerable part of the Riverbanks, and we have got a major project going on at the moment, £287,000 Heritage Lottery Fund grant, which is helping us to work to conserve the riverbanks, to keep them open as a public park for the people of Durham and the visitors of Durham. It's also been great in terms of volunteering. Lots and lots of people coming to help. We've been setting up bird feeding stations, people coming to help doing the conservation work in terms of the trees and forestry as well. The big thing for us at the moment, on the 19th of November, we are awaiting the outcome of our Heritage Lottery Fund bid, Stage 2, for £3.85 million, which will help support Open Treasure. We already have the backing and support of a lot of trusts who are making grants, and obviously some of them are waiting for the outcome of the Heritage Lottery Fund. But I think this is absolutely great news for the North East. I think the cathedral is acting responsibly. It is looking towards preserving this fantastic building for the future. It is looking towards integrating and working with the community, because there's a huge benefit for the city of Durham and the county of Durham in what we're doing. So yes, we are making an economic contribution to the local community. Yes, we are working with the local community, and it's a two-way process, which is what is so exciting. The best way to come and see it is come and visit us. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. I think so it seems like we've got quite a few students in the audience, and that to me is nothing, is a wonderful example of product development that respects the sense of place. And that's really important in any destination, that we're developing tourism products, tourism experiences that reflect the values that the host community in particular put on the buildings, the spaces, the places that you perhaps as tourists are visiting. And that's very much the theme of the final presentation from Chris Warren. Chris is a sustainable tourism consultant based in Australia, over here for a couple of weeks, and is going to talk about some of the work he's been doing with the indigenous communities in his part of Australia. Thanks, Chris.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, good afternoon. It's probably morning in Australia, actually. Jet lag. I'm going to tell you some stories about Australia, which I hope you find interesting and helpful. There are 3 examples of intangible cultural heritage and how much tourism puts back into conservation and communities. The stories involve meanings that reinforce local identity. They are integrated into destination experiences, and through active visitor participation, the heritage is conserved. The acts of conservation help to build community resilience, which is extremely important nowadays in Australia with our climate. The economic value from tourism goes much further than expenditure figures alone. It is the oil that lubricates the lasting legacy and that helps to sustain the community. My brief talk will concentrate on 3 Australian examples. These stories are of humble attractions. They're not quite the same buildings we've been talking about earlier. They guide us on maximising responsible tourism and heritage contribution to communities. And the 3 points are that we need to recognise that heritage and legacy tourists are a separate category from visitors to heritage places. Their revenues offer significant economic contributions to communities. Secondly, such tourists contribute to a community's intangible heritage conservation by supporting acts of remembrance and performance. This is particularly important for Aboriginal people. The value of intangible heritage helps to reinforce a community's identity and contributes to community development and resilience. So my first example is Booderee, which in the Darugul language means plenty fish, which is a jointly managed park with the Wreck Bay Aboriginal Community and National Parks Australia. The park is located 3 hours south of Sydney on the south coast of New South Wales. The Aboriginal community live in the park. The gate revenue from 400,000 visitors a year enables 80% of the employees at the park to be Aboriginal. It provides $270,000 annually in a lease and a $1 million maintenance contract awarded to the community. The revenues enable the community to survive intact. Just to give you a bit of context, we have 260 Aboriginal nations in Australia. Some are very much intact in Northern Territories and so forth, but in the areas around New South Wales, particularly around Sydney, they were decimated. So to have an Aboriginal community that close to Sydney that is intact is extremely important. Now, heritage tourists receive educational tours, storytelling, performance activities which generate additional revenues. So they have bush tucker explanations, they have Dreamtime stories explained to them, and there are trails with interpretive guiding activities, as you would expect. However, these Aboriginal experiences are also offered to local non-Aboriginal communities around the region. This is sowing the seeds for a more multicultural society between first Australians and settlers. Dreamtime stories, like how King Bundula and his 12 wives created the 12 nations of the South Coast, are helping to establish a new sense of place for young white generation, and so in evolving intangible cultural heritage. To put that in context, my mother-in-law went to a very good school in Sydney, and she had absolutely no Aboriginal formal education. My wife, who was educated during the 1970s and 80s, had 2 weeks. During history lessons, the Aboriginal children were asked to leave and went into their own classrooms. Today, we have a monumental change where young kids are actually having Aboriginal people go into their schools. My older children in secondary school have a particular course that they can choose on Aboriginal cultural heritage. And in January, there will be a much more progressive program for primary schools. So we aren't a multicultural nation in the sense of Vietnamese, Italians, and English, but we are moving towards a multicultural society, which is, I think, is great news for people abroad who I know have been concerned about recent activities there. Importantly, the community also invites young disadvantaged Aboriginal youth from Sydney and regional New South Wales so they can reconnect with country. If they were born not in their nation, then they have, for them, no connection back to the afterlife and a very little understanding of the values of their lives. So this is a great opportunity for the conservation of their intangible heritage. In these ways, Dreamtime stories, like King Bundula, are living and evolving. It reinforces the community's identity and helps eliminate poverty for Boordaree. My second example is now 300 kilometres away to the west in a town called Grenfell in the Weedon Shire, which has it's a council area which has a population of 3,600 people. It is the birthplace of Henry Lawson. Lawson is, in fact, recognised as one of Australia's finest literary figures, who was a complex, troubled man who liked his drink and wrote about life as he saw it in the 1880s to the 1920s. It was a very tough existence, where families lived in bark huts with dirt floors and where European farming practices were at odds with a climate that may not have rained for maybe up to 8 months. His poems and stories showed how early settlers and gold prospectors struggled through their own resources, often with great humour, like the famous Loaded Dog story, which is still read through schools across the nation. Now, that's a story where some gold prospectors have got some dynamite and the dog thinks it's a sausage and nobody wants to pat the dog afterwards. So, Lawson lived for 55 years, the same length of time that the Henry Lawson Festival has been running in Grenfell. Some of the 70 people employed in tourism and members of the community voluntarily organise the 2-day festival, which attracts 6,500 people, 80% of whom are outside the council area. They generate $1.9 million worth of direct expenditure. I mean, again, to put that in context, white Australia is 200 years old, so to have an event running for 55 years, i.e. 2 generations, is quite a long time for us. 80% of the visitors are legacy tourists or heritage tourists. Many have attended up to 9 times and thus contribute to the bulk of expenditure. The programme content includes a special poetry session at the obelisk marking Henry's birthplace, in a tent on the rough goldfields of that time. The music, events, and the papier-mâché bust of the poet created by the townspeople, which is annually centre stage. Not everybody loves that papier-mâché bust. Obviously, it wouldn't go in the National Gallery in the UK, but it's made by local people, and they love it, and they all have their pictures taken beside it every year. For the audience, it creates moments of identity, recreating social practices of the youth or forming them, and creating bonds through shared experiences. Tourism sustains the festival. The performances conserve the evolving heritage. This fortifies those present as they connect with the past countrymen who lived through droughts, floods, and fires. The value of this event is much more than mere money. It actually helps to reaffirm their identity. And I'm quoting here the person that organises the event. I could not agree more. Holding the annual Grenfell Henry Lawson Festival of Arts does more than conserve identity. It connects visitors to the national history. Henry Lawson was arguably Australia's greatest short story writer and poet. He, to Grenfell, is sort of like everybody's son. It has been recorded and said many times that Henry was the people's poet, and that he was. So you can hear the words of pride there. So really, tourism helps conserve Grenfell's heritage, and so builds pride and sustains the community's stoic identity, key factors for community development. And the theme of today's discussion is about economic development from heritage, and it's key for those of you involved in community development that there has to be pride, there has to be a capacity within the community to see a future. So my final example is more recent, which is set in Cowra, which isn't far from Grenfell, but a very different story. Cowra is the site of the only armed combat on Australian soil in World War II. The prisoners of war in the camp in Cowra contained 1,104 Japanese soldiers, and in 1944 they decided that it was not appropriate for them just to stay as prisoners, so they agreed to have a suicide escape. The one Australian machine gunner and his mate on duty gunned down 300 of the Japanese as they escaped. Just as an aside, those that were left and running around the bush obviously didn't know what to do. They were eventually caught. Some went up to little houses, knocked on the door, little old ladies opened them, took them in, gave them tea and cake, and then rang the police, which is a sort of very much an Australian way, and is symbolic of this story. At the end of the war, returning Australian servicemen to Cowra looked after the Japanese war graves and tended them. Again, in context, there was a lot of bitterness for Australians after the war because of the way they'd been looked after in the prisoner of war camps in Singapore and so forth. Many years later, the Japanese came to be aware of the goodwill shown by the Cowra residents and, with Australian government support, built the largest Japanese gardens in the southern hemisphere. Every year since 1964, Cowra has held the Festival of International Understanding, which celebrates the world's cultures. The town has also been awarded the United Nations Peace Bell. It's the only place that isn't in a capital city. So Canberra doesn't have it. So now you can see the very large Japanese gardens. The site of the POW camp is obviously just a green field. There's the Peace Bell, and there's the Japanese war graves. Nearly half the visitors to Cowra come specifically to view the Peace Collection, which includes the POW camp and the gardens. The awareness of the unique historic facts have helped raise considerable grant funding, which is important for a small community, and every year $1.2 million in revenue from the gardens to help with the maintenance and so forth. But I think which is very interesting is significantly the Japanese consider the place of importance. Legacy tourists represent 7% of the total visitors to the area. Annually, official representatives of the Japanese government pay their respects. Legacy tourists conserve the intangible heritage through repeat performances and creating bonds through shared experiences, as you can see there. And to quote Lawrence Ryan, who's the president of the Cowra Breakout Society, he says, "The story of the breakout and the reconciliation between Cowra and Japan is so well known in the local community that it has truly become the foundation block of the town's unique place in history." Now, remembering that we are 200 years old, we don't have lots of heritage that's available in Europe. So if you think back to some of the towns that you're familiar with in Europe and how they've created their character, these are the same sorts of things that are now evolving in Australia. It exemplifies the Australian character, I believe, of not bearing a grudge, to shake hands and look beyond. It is a story of goodwill sustained by heritage and legacy tourism. It creates a competitive edge for the community, and the Cowra Peace Collection is estimated to bring in $17.5 million in overnight direct expenditure per year, which is a lot of money for a small community out there. So to conclude, I think that tourism in Booderee, Grenfell and Cowra enables the communities to run activities and showcase their intangible heritage. In this way, tourism contributes to the community's heritage conservation by supporting acts of remembrance and performance. The value of intangible heritage helps to reinforce a community's identity and contributes to community development and resilience, essential for economic development. It is important to recognize that heritage and legacy tourists are a separate category from visitors to heritage places. Their revenues offer significant economic contribution to communities, and responsible tourism would benefit from targeting the people who care about the heritage. For what it's worth, I've integrated some of these into 30 tourism trails. 50% of the marketing budget has been focused on just the 11 councils that those trails are in. And way more public relations exposure has been generated by promoting it to just those communities, because they're building their pride and they're inviting visiting friends and relatives and legacy tourists, which is more cost effective and more relevant to those sites. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for that. When we brief our speakers, we always ask them to speak for 6 minutes, knowing they'll take 10. Hadn't anticipated they'd probably take on average 13. Jonathan, unfortunately, has to leave us. He's got a train to catch. I'm not even going to tell yet. Yeah, he's actually off to Durham, and we didn't know that beforehand. But we do have a few minutes for any questions for the... Thank you, Jonathan. Any questions for the other speakers? We've got roving mics. Anybody? If not, I'm going to pick on somebody. Oh, we've got a question towards the back? Yeah. And if it's directed at a particular person, can you...
Hi, I'm Janie from Tourism Transparency. Unfortunately, this was mostly for Jonathan, but we'll see how it goes anyway. So I know he briefly touched upon the displacement of communities in Cambodia, for example, for the building of hotels to accommodate the increase of tourists. But I'm sure you also know of many examples where forced displacement occurred to help preserve heritage sites, such as those forced out of the temple zone of Ol Bagan in Burma in the 1990s, for example. So that was not for the hotel zone specifically, but for the belief that their remaining there would have an irreversibly negative impact on the delicate historical sites. So, my question to you is, do you think it's necessary to displace people from their native land to preserve those historical sites, or do you think it's possible for communities to remain on the same land as the historical monuments, and if possible, how? Like, what steps can be taken for them to protect both the communities and the historical sites?
Thanks for the question. I think there are two aspects there. There's a sort of philosophical, ethical aspect to it, and then a practical one. I think I'm looking at Chris here to maybe comment on the practical side. But I'm just going to say, from an ethical perspective, I think all of us would agree it's not right. Another example I'm aware of is Pelourinho in Brazil, where the community was moved out of some beautiful colonial era buildings during a major conservation stroke restoration project. Hopefully those kinds of things are now very few, far between now. But Chris, have you got a perspective from Australia?
Well, yes, I would say Uluru would be a good example. Where the community are asking tourists not to climb Uluru, which obviously erodes that particular site, and it is reasonably successful. The problem is that international visitors have an expectation to climb it. The word hasn't gone out far enough, but there is an example where national parks and the community are trying to manage the site so the community are not displaced, earn revenue, and their monument or their site is preserved.
Yeah. I mean, I think to touch on a phrase that Vanessa used in her presentation as well, she's talking about partnerships, and we all like to think that we're working in equal partnerships, but in reality quite often there's a balance of power that isn't necessarily in favour of the community. And I think it's particularly organisations like the National Trusts, like World Monument Fund, ICRETH, for instance, to make sure that national governments, state parties are aware of these concerns, that we try and minimise these issues in future. Any other questions? Yeah, down at the front here with Benjamin. We've got one here. Oh, sorry, is a gentleman there as well? Yeah. Do you want to go first and then Ben afterwards?
Yeah, that's right. I noticed, as Oliver's talk was about the underground temple in Malta, and limiting the visitors to 10 persons per hour. Is there any plans to build a simulated visit? Like, I think they do that with the caves in Altamira, where they actually constructed a copy of it and allow the visitors to visit that copy to relieve the pressure on the actual monument itself.
I'm not sure that I can actually answer that question. What I can say is that there are archaeological remains on the surface which visitors can spend time at as part of the whole experience, but because of the actual temple itself, I can't remember. It was actually a number of years that I was there. I believe they do have a visitor centre where there is a sort of a video installed for people to actually see the hypogeum, which don't have the opportunity of actually visiting it. I mean, it's a big issue, that, because it is a bit exclusive, charging 30 euros to visitors. You really have to be very committed and have the money. You have to make a decision. I mean, for a family of 4 or 6 or whatever, it's a huge impact on your holiday budget, I would imagine. So that is an issue, but at the same time, they are desperately trying to preserve it, and they get 1,800 euros a day, as my slide showed. They're foregoing, I don't know what, but I mean, if they charge 5 euros per visit and they had 1,000 visitors or 600 visitors a day, you can work it out. I mean, it's a lot of income being foregone, but at the same time, they are protecting the site. I can't actually answer the specific question. I could find out for you if you would like me to, but I know that there is the opportunity to see. I'm pretty sure there's an opportunity to see a video of what goes on underground.
Yeah, I mean, this whole issue of how you make heritage sites, particularly fragile sites, accessible to as broad a community as possible is something that certainly in the UK we've been doing pretty well in recent years with a lot of Heritage Lottery Fund money. I'm also aware, specifically in terms of replicas, at the Mogao Caves World Heritage Site in Dunhuang in China, which are beautiful limestone caves decorated with lots of Buddhist paintings. 2 replicas have been created specifically so people can have their photographs taken within them. You're not allowed to take flash photography within the original caves, but obviously everybody wants a picture of themselves with that backdrop. So in terms of the souvenir to take home, there's something, but then tourists can still get the experience by going in the original. Thank you. Benjamin.
Thank you.
Benjamin Carey, Strategy. I also sit on the UNESCO Scotland Committee. In Scotland, we're very interested in intangible cultural heritage, traditional food, language, music, dance. And this is key to interpreting heritage in any country, and it's very important to tourism. Without mentioning names, there are some state parties, UNESCO state parties, who have not subscribed to the Convention on Safeguarding the Intangible Cultural Heritage. What arguments would you make to the national bodies for UNESCO to persuade them that intangible cultural heritage is actually the key to sustainable economic development through tourism?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. They're not even aware. A lot of people are not even aware of the document. I think it's essentially that councils are focusing very much on how to help rural communities, and they are currently ignoring the stories, etc., that they have. The project that I've just completed appears to be one of the first examples of this, and I'm going to be recording the economic improvement and therefore have an example. They are unaspiring people in many ways and unconfident about their stories and don't realise the tremendous value that they have. So I'm hoping that this project will demonstrate that. So demonstration first, lots of other international examples, secondly, and thirdly, the need for the community to own the destination management plan which records those stories. I think that will be the right way forward.
Thank you. Time for one final question right at the back there.
Yes, I just want to circle back to one of the beginning questions about displacement, because I was thinking if you take on a major renovation in your own property, and you're going to have builders and all these workmen in or workwomen in, then you displace yourself by moving out for that to take place. So it made me start thinking that actually, although you can kind of say displacement doesn't happen or it isn't a good thing, it actually does happen, and I think I'm just wondering if it has to be managed as part of the process in relation to choice and consultation and when the people come back. So that was really more of a comment.
Yeah, well, I think as an observation in terms of, Jonathan from the outside said, tourism must be managed, but the whole conservation, heritage conservation process must be managed, and I think we are getting much better at it with the industry. I think the interesting thing is when activities are going on, how you communicate them to the travel trade. It's back to something Vanessa mentioned about expectations, what people are expecting to see, keeping that going, not disappointing people. So thank you. I've been getting signs from the back that we need to vacate the room. So I'd like to thank you all for attending. I hope you found it interesting. And I'd like, again, to thank the speakers for their contributions.